He served 9 terms in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from Pennsylvania's heartland, southern Lancaster County, and for a little over 2.5 years, he served as Speaker, wielding the gavel in the same position once held by Ben Franklin. Earlier this year, he announced his retirement. He's still pretty young, in good shape, and he's been doing some reflecting on his nearly 20-year run in the state legislature. Our friend, Representative Brian Cutler, on tonight's State of Independence. Stay with us. You've met tonight's guest before on this program. Last time we spoke to him from the office of the Speaker. Tonight, just weeks after he announced his retirement from the House, Representative Brian Cutler joins us tonight from our Harrisburg studio. And by the way, if you'd like to see that last interview with Brian, where we talk about the ways his Christian faith challenged and prepared him for this assignment, scan the QR code on the screen or do a quick search in our YouTube channel. Brian, welcome back to State of Independence. Let me begin with perhaps the obvious question, why? And why did you decide that this was the right time to exit? And do you sense this as the end of your public service career?
Now is the right time for a host of reasons. One, it's good for my wife and I and our kids as they all are transitioning in their own stages of life. But more importantly, I'm somebody who has supported and voted for and prime sponsored and co-sponsored ways to return to a part-time legislature and term limits. So at some point you have to abide by those yourself, and I think now's a good time to move on. I also had worked to transition out of the leader's office, a role that I was blessed to hold for 2 different terms, one in the majority, one in the minority, and now with the new team in place, I think that the caucus is in great hands and they're going to do great things as we go forward. So I think for all those reasons, now's a great time to transition into whatever's next.
Well, by all accounts, you've certainly given us a great example, left a great example for the people following you to follow. And you have a good, strong relationship with the person who succeeded you as Speaker, who's a woman and a Democrat on the other side of the aisle from you. And in this day and age where there's so much contention, or oftentimes we read about the contention between political parties, it's really encouraging to hear that you and your successor have a good relationship.
Well, as we were talking a little bit before the interview, it's sad that that is newsworthy in today's world, but I understand that that is in fact kind of the nature sometimes of this business. I distinctly remember when I was serving in my role as minority leader and Speaker McClinton was serving as Speaker, we spoke on a panel together up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And it was interesting because the MC for the panel said, I'd like you to each say something complimentary about one another as opposed to your policy differences. That was one of the questions that we were given. And we were not given those questions ahead of time. And I've always admired Speaker McClinton's passion on issues. We may not always agree, but that doesn't mean that we can't work on those things that we do agree on and then very intelligently and professionally debate those where we aren't in agreement.
Very, very good. That's encouraging to hear, and would be a blessing if it was that way all across the country, of course. But delighted to hear that you and your successor had that opportunity, and that it was such a civil exchange. When you first were elected, you were elected 20 years ago, right?
Yes, it was. It was 2006 election for the 7/8 session. It in many ways it seems just like yesterday. But nearly 2 decades have passed me by since then. I've got quite a bit more gray in the beard and in my hairline, unfortunately.
When you first got elected, what did you think it was going to be like, and what did you hope to accomplish when you first were elected? I mean, long before you ever knew you'd be Speaker, obviously. But what did you think, and what were you hoping to accomplish when you first got there?
Well, when I first came, I really just wanted to serve my friends and neighbors who had really served my sister and I in our small community as we grew up. Both of my parents were terminally ill. My father passed away my senior year of high school. My mom had Lou Gehrig's disease and lived for about 5.5, 6 years after that. And it was our church, it was the Lions Club, our friends and our neighbors who showed up to cut firewood for us. They delivered meals, helped provide care so my sister and I could go to church youth group and things like that. So I recognized early on that I was given an opportunity to pursue my own career. I kind of took a disjointed path from x-ray school to my undergrad at Lebanon Valley College, and from there eventually went to law school when I was 28. And had it not been for their intervention very early on in my life and showing us that kind of love and compassion, I would not have been able to pursue that path. So when I got my law degree, I decided I wanted to use it for the betterment of the community that supported me when I needed it the most. And it's been an honor to serve them and represent them and their values in Harrisburg for the last 2 decades.
That's very kind of you to talk that way. Because you've been a legislator now for 20 years, what would you consider, given all the legislation and the various other things that you've done as a member of the state legislature, what would you consider to be your biggest accomplishment in that time?
Well, I know that many times people would list bills that they worked on, and I had the privilege to work on many very big issues for the Commonwealth, whether it was our health insurance exchange, which is the weird political world where both Governor Wolf and President Trump wanted the same thing. That was certainly fun to work through. We've worked on, updating our trauma system to help care for patients, particularly in rural areas, and provide funding for those. But honestly, the biggest thing that I've ever worked on really was a case that came in my very first term. We had a set of grandparents came in, and their grandson, Noah Staley, had a brain tumor that he needed a very specific kind of treatment. And at that time, there were only 4 or 5 places in the entire country that would provide the treatment that he needed. One of them happened to be in Penn, but they would not do kids under the age of 5. So we ended up working with the insurance company and getting him the care that he needed down in Texas. And, he was diagnosed at 18 months. He was treated from ages 2 to 4. And every year since then, his parents have brought him by. They stop and see me at the Solanco Fair. And it's just been a blessing to see him grow up and really just be a normal individual, a normal kid growing up with his brothers and sisters and his family. And that's the kind of impact that you can have in a job like this. And I know a lot of people tend to focus on, whatever legislative policy they worked on, or maybe the grant money they brought home to the district. But impacting people's lives is really the most important thing that any of us can do, and helping them in their time of need.
That is so well said. I mean, I think oftentimes people think in terms of just the legislative accomplishments, but at the end of the day, that boils down to human beings, the people, flesh and blood folks who become the beneficiaries of whatever work it is you've been doing in that House of Representatives. And thank God for the good work that you and a number of your colleagues were doing to be able to help that young man. And how old is he now? He's how old?
He's 18, so
Wow.
I've seen him for the last 15 years, if I'm doing my math right. And it's every year when they swing by and they come by one of the 3 days of the Solanco Fair, they make a point of it. I greatly appreciate it, and it's been fantastic. I actually had him on the floor when I was sworn in as leader and shared that story because one of the things I think that we oftentimes miss in politics is that human connection. And I shared Noah's story, and I said, that's one of the reasons why I ran for office, was I wanted to be able to help people the same way that I myself was helped when I was younger. And, that was a living, breathing example. And I encouraged the members. I said, talk to your fellow colleagues, understand why they are here, understand what drove them to run for office, because when you understand that, you will understand how they make decisions. And you will understand what colors their judgment and what their areas of interest are. And I have found time and time again that human interest and our areas of passion oftentimes overlap in ways that you would never anticipate. And you could work with individuals that you might never see yourself working with them on any other issue. But if you're willing to share what is important to you, you can find that common ground, and you can find, you can find that that common good that you can both work towards. And that to me is really the spirit of this job each and every day. Yes, the bills are important. Yes, the budgets are important. Yes, the the ideas and the debate we have are all very important, but it's not nearly as important as impacting someone's life like that.
I'm glad that you remembered what had happened to you about your own experience, as a young person, having two parents who were, who having your father pass away and your mother incapacitated, and remembering the help that you got and what a difference it made in your life. And I'm so glad you're able to pass it forward, that you're able to do the same thing for people coming after you, to be able to help your constituents and also to see the work you do that way. I think it's pretty easy when you get to the halls of Harrisburg to lose that sense of things. It's so easy to become self-consumed in the power and the glory and the majesty. You're there with all those big, majestic buildings. They hang the photos. You got to be speaker. They do a portrait of you when you're speaker, and then that portrait hangs in the halls there, in the hallway there, which is pretty outstanding, heady stuff. To know that your portrait, long after you're gone, people are going to walk past that portrait and see Brian Cutler, Speaker of the House, for years and centuries after you're gone from here. That's pretty heady stuff. And for you to not lose perspective about what really matters, I think is a real blessing, and it's a testimony to the rest of us as to what it means to be a Christian person in that position, because you're a Christian person in that position. You also did something that's unusual. Oftentimes people will leave the speaker's job and then just and be done with it, but and resign altogether from the House. But you chose to stick around, which is pretty wonderful. It's kind of similar to what John Quincy Adams did. He was a congressman or a member of Congress, and then he became president, and then after he left the presidency, he went back to being a member of Congress, and was very impactful in the time even after. There was a movie called Amistad, which talks about some of the stuff he did, the lives he saved after he left the presidency and was once again a member of Congress. I'm just so delighted. Tell us what it was like for you to step down from the speaker's chair and to be among the rank and file again.
Well, it certainly was an honor to be speaker, and I don't want to speak ill of my time there, but it also was a very challenging time. You look back, it was in 2020, heading to 21-22, so we're in the middle of COVID. We had a lot of vetoes from the governor as we were running bills to reopen the state. So it certainly was a very tense time, but it really is more administrative in nature. I enjoyed being leader much more than I did speaker, and made up my mind that I was not going to run for speaker again, that I would much prefer to be leader if the caucus would agree to that. They did. As it happened, we also ended up in the minority at that cycle. And one of the things I noticed, to your point, was most people tended to leave from there, and they took with them all of their knowledge and all of their experiences. And one of the things, we've had very high turnover in my 20 years since I've been there, and I thought it would be helpful to still be available as a resource. I had promised the current leader that I would certainly stay through the first budget. Little did I know how long the budget would drag on past the deadline. But I wanted to make sure that I was available, because once I leave, I'm not allowed to discuss issues with them for a one-year period. So I thought it would just be a practical way to kind of handle it and eventually make that handoff, warm handoff to the next generation of leaders who I think will do great things.
Yeah, that's the right attitude to have, but not one that's necessarily often used. To be thinking about the folks that are coming after you, and the fact that, I've got this tremendous body of knowledge and experience, and, maybe I can help. When I leave the speaker's chair, that to me is just the right attitude to have. I'm guessing that your work as speaker also had an impact on your family life, because obviously this is not just a 9-to-5 position. It's you're speaker, and I guess you're needed on weekends and during family hours. Tell us about the impact it had on your family.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was a lot on my family, and that's one of the many reasons why I think those positions tend to have what I refer to as a time or a shelf life. I knew going in that everybody I'd served with had only really ever been in those positions for 2 to 6 years, depending, and I was mindful of that. So I tried my best to make the most of that opportunity, but it also allowed me to throw myself into that job, knowing that, at least in my own mind, that there was an end that was out in the very near future. One of my funniest stories is actually I was picking up my youngest daughter, who will be 18 on Saturday. I picked her up from school one day, and Governor Wolf was on the phone about the budget, and we were discussing it, and of course I had Governor Wolf as the identity that has showed up on the screen in the car, and she kind of got all quiet and goes, "Is that the governor?" And and he said hello to her, and we had a good laugh about it. But she still laughs about that, and that was. But for my kids, many times, they got to meet presidents, they got to meet the governor, they got to meet a whole host of people and have opportunities that I never had as a young person. And I'm glad that they were able to have it, but it was very demanding because many months, I was traveling nationally to discuss policy or raise money or, whatever those demands are, sometimes 2 out of every 4 weeks. So it certainly meant a lot of missed, sporting events or school events and concerts and what have you. So thankfully, they were very supportive. You flashed up the photo earlier of the portrait unveiling, and yes, it'll be neat to think someday that my grandkids, if that's in the future, or other people who know us will walk down the hallways and see it. But truthfully, the most important thing in that photo is my family. And we have 3 wonderful kids. They're 22, 20, and almost 18. And to have lived and breathed this experience with them, and my lovely wife, Jennifer, who is just fantastic. She's been an outstanding supporter and partner through all of this. When I asked her about running for office the first time, her quote was very easy to remember because it was 2 words. It was absolutely not. And so I said, well, don't you want to think about it? Don't you want to pray about it? And she said, no. And to her credit, she did both of those things. And then she came back months later and said, if that's what the Lord has in store for you, I'm sure he'll open the doors. And he did. And it's been a wonderful and crazy ride. And now I get the chance to support her as she pursues her professional degree. So I'm excited about that.
That's very, very nice. Very, very nice. Wives can be very, very to the point, which is very helpful.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. The Lord certainly blessed me in that world.
We'll consider this an exit interview, even though there's more than half a year left in his term in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. We'll be right back with my guest tonight, Representative Brian Cutler.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
"2026 will mark the completion of 20 years service in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for Representative Brian Cutler. He's reflecting tonight on lessons learned during an extraordinary career in public service. Brian, in the time we have left, I'd love for you to sit down with every aspiring politician and offer a little advice. First, how do you know whether running for office is an ego trip or a calling? And then how can you tell?
Wow, that's a big item to unpack here as we're wrapping up, Joe. But I think that if you understand what drives people, you'll understand how they make decisions. I've met many of my colleagues who had circumstances that were very similar to mine. They had somebody who engaged them early on. And I think when you ask them what the most important part about them running is, you'll get the answer right then. And I think the people that are well-grounded in their faith and their family, they will make the best public servants because you'll understand why they're doing what they do.
Yeah, in a perfect world, you're there to love your neighbors yourself. You're serving your neighbors. You're there to help people. For many people, for some people, not many, but for some, it's maybe about growing your social media presence, getting more likes, getting a bigger following, building up your own name ID and the like, as opposed to, really zeroing in on your worldview and how it is you can help people, within that worldview. It'd be wonderful. Obviously, I know you don't have the time to tell everybody, but that's wonderful advice for those who might be aspiring to a career in politics. What was your biggest challenge? Looking back on it, what was the hardest thing for you if you had to name one thing while you were there?
Well, I think that the COVID pandemic and the friction with the governor was certainly one of the biggest issues. We just adamantly disagreed with how the pandemic was handled. And despite that friction, he and I still had a very good working relationship, which I think is important and somewhat rare in this day and age. And we sent a total of, I think, 21 or 22 bills to his desk that he vetoed. And we always had very frank and open communication. He would tell me, he'd be like, you know what, I'm going to veto the bill that reopens, the garden centers, or I'm going to, veto the bill regarding opening up outdoor sporting events. And I understood where he was coming from. I just happened to disagree with him. But we never let that interfere with our ability to still work on those things that we wanted to get done, such as, the insurance exchange, the penny exchange that you see all over the place today. That was something that President Trump wanted done. It was something that Governor Wolf wanted done. And being able to still work in those areas while we debated our differences and in a very public way. But I always took pride in the fact that it was never personal between the governor and I. We were able to keep policy, and personal items on the personal level. That doesn't mean that it was easy. In fact, sometimes it was very difficult. But I can say that, every time that we agreed to work on something, whether it was getting the budget done on time, whether it was saving money for our Commonwealth and improving the financial state, we were able to do that. And I think that's a testament to, really how you approach the job really does have an impact on many things far into the future.
And when you're a leader of your party, what are the pressures that come from your own side?
Well, that's actually one of the things that I think lends itself to a very short, shelf life, if you will, in that world, is being in the leader world or the speaker world, because while I'm blessed because where I'm at on many issues is 100% where the members of the district live and the residents of the district are. But the Republican caucus is very diverse. A Republican from one of the collar counties is very different than Lancaster County or very different than Potter County. And, it is important to understand where people can be on a variety of issues, because in truth, many times it's a target-rich environment to find some level of compromise. And I'm not talking about issues that are morally clear. I'm talking about issues on the budget, issues on spending, or how we focus on, improving or ensuring the integrity of our welfare programs. We were able to find agreement broadly. We had about 648 bills passed in my session, the 1920s. So I was leader for about 18 months, speaker for 6. 648 bills passed. About 221, I think it was, ended up on the governor's desk. And those were both record numbers for decades into the past. And so was the 21 or 22 vetoes that we got. So those were all records, but we were able to get there because we were willing to support each other on our issues, recognizing that our own issues that were important to each of our geographical areas would also be addressed. And that kind of focus, I think, is what's necessary, particularly in this day and age.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Representative Brian Cutler. Representative Brian Cutler will conclude his time in the Pennsylvania General Assembly this November. On December 1st, he'll be an ordinary citizen. Brian, thank you for your public service. We can't wait to see how God will use you next. We'll be right back with our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
And now let's talk to our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
It's a rare thing to see people who are generally unaffected by power before and after. I mean, usually when you see people go through the political process, especially after 20 years, there's certain lifestyle habits they adjust, maybe better shoes, maybe a higher quality suit, maybe hair's a little different. I mean, there's just improvements that accompany your rise up the ladder. Brian Cutler is one of those people who I would venture to say he probably has some suits and shoes. I'm not sure that he wore that freshman year because he is the same person. In fact, if there's anything, he is more self-aware of his limits and the fact that God really is in control of his life. That is always the default when you hear him kind of revert back to his identity is not in this political office. And I'm always very, very curious about people who I've observed who are willing to give that up.
You see what he said was the most important thing? His biggest accomplishment?
Yeah. People.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talking about the ability to help somebody and use your power to help people, and knowing that it is, look, I think this is where so many of us think perhaps wrongly about political power, is that it's so temporary. It's like sand or water that goes through your hand and it's gone. And by the way, people don't remember you, and your family will have, as you said, a nice visit to the Capitol one day, and there he is. Well, he kind of looks the same. But years after, you have to go to the book. You've got to go to Wikipedia, whatever the equivalent is, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And having that perspective and mindset allows you to be in public service for whatever reason God has you there, and then to walk out, leave the building, and then do something else. And you don't have to be loud and boisterous, and you don't have to be posting on social media for a few minutes. And I like guys like that.
Yeah, well,
and women like that.
And coming from you, a former state rep yourself, you know, who served, and you know what you know what it is to be in a position of power, and then look at how God has used you in your time since.
He can use even me and even you, right?
Amen, brother. Amen. Amen. God is good. There's no limit to the ways God can use you if you allow him to direct your path. God placed Brian Cutler in a position to bless so many people during his time in the state capitol. Imagine what he can do with you if you trust him. If you have a minute, send me a note in the comment box on my website. I enjoy reading how a guest helped and encouraged you. For Jeff Coleman and the entire team behind the cameras here at Lighthouse TV, thanks so much for watching. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. I'll look for you back here next week.